My name is Spencer Kaufman with Social Media Ministries, and this is Pastor Davey Collins with River Valley Church.
Hey, everybody.
Davey, does God command us to tithe?
Yeah, he does. But more specifically, the tithe predates law.
Okay, and that's Old Covenant
Yeah, so
and New Covenant.
when we're talking about the tithe, it was instituted as an act of worship.
Okay.
You bring your tithe, and that was before the law or the covenant ever came into practice. And then as the law was being shared and developed, the tithe was part of that. Now the tithe is 10%. Tithe is a math word.
Yeah, it's just tenth.
It just means a tenth.
So literally the definition is tenth. It's not even a verb.
Yeah, so we've turned it into that, which is cool. It's all good.
Easy
And
understanding.
so a tithe is in the old covenant. It predates the old covenant. It's in the old covenant, and there's nothing in because of its inception. It doesn't have to do with moral cleansing. It doesn't have to do with ceremony. It has to do with worship. And there's nothing that we see in the new covenant that removes that responsibility of tithing. In fact, Jesus says, yes, you should tithe, yet don't neglect the needs of others. That's what Jesus says. So
He raised the bar.
So in the new covenant, let's look at two different areas. There's that passage in Luke where Jesus says, yeah, you should tithe. You're tithing all these things. Yes, you should tithe. You should give a tenth, but you shouldn't neglect the needs of others. Here's why that's a key distinction. The tithe is giving a tenth of your income, what you receive from God. We don't even call it giving; we call it returning.
Right.
Because you receive everything you have comes from God. You return to God a tenth.
As a thank you or obedience?
Obedience. It's obedient giving. It's a heart issue. It's a trust thing. It's God has my whole life, and this is part of the way in which I show God that He has my life. It's
trust Him.
It's part of it.
Yeah.
It's part of it. It's not the whole thing, but it's part of it. And that goes according to Malachi, according to the Old Testament. It goes to what we would call your local church. So the storehouse, the place where you are fed, the temple, the place where you are spiritually taken care of. That is where your tithe goes. And so when it comes to so there's that piece of it. Jesus says you should tithe, but don't neglect the needs of others. So tithing is base level. Like when you look at as Jesus established a new covenant with His blood, with Him giving His life, the way that He institutes that law is He takes all of the old covenant and says, you have heard it said, fill in the blank.
Right.
But I say to you, and then He elevates it.
Yeah.
So you have heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I say to you, if you even think about somebody lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. You've heard it said, do not murder. But I say to you, even if you get angry with your brother, you've already committed murder in your heart. So it elevates the law. So when people think, well, I don't need to tithe because it's new covenant. Right. Well, that's simply not true.
Yeah.
First of all, because Jesus says you should tithe. Right. So there's that piece of it. There's also the piece that if you're a New Testament giver, then 10% should be the absolute minimum.
Right, because Jesus said, you've heard it said, a tenth.
Yeah, and then he says,
more.
and then when he talks about prayer, when he talks about fasting, when he talks about giving, he says, when you pray like this. When you fast like this. When you give like this.
Excellent example.
And so there's not if you feel like it, then go for it. It's it's an absolute expectation that we hear straight from Jesus that when you do this, meaning you should be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two examples. Tithing is important because there is a supernatural principle with the tithe, and the only way I can really share how it is or why it is with what God said in Malachi. Test me in this.
Yeah.
Test me in this and see. He says, bring your whole tithe to the storehouse and see if I will not open up the windows of heaven and pour out so much blessing on your life that you won't have room enough to contain it. And then he says, test me in this. And man, if God says something and he says, like, test me. If somebody says something to me, like, and I say try me, I better be real confident.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's one thing God is confident about, is it's his divine principle of the tithe.
Right.
And so all I would say to anybody watching is test God in this.
Right.
So your local church, your local place where you are spiritually fed, which you should have one.
Mm-hmm.
So
at least
side note, you should have a place that you are fed. We're not talking about church hopping and you like the worship here, so you go there. You like the teaching there, so you go there. No, it's not about those things. It's the local church community that you are planted in. That's a conviction for me. So it's your local church. So you tithe to your local church. A tithe is a tenth. A tithe is not 5%. It's not 2%. It's 10%. You trust God with the tithe. You test God with the tithe and see if he won't throw open the windows of heaven, pour out so much blessing on your life that you won't have enough room to store it.